My boss looked at me with cold dismissal and said his son was taking over. I was out, but the final checkmate had already been played without him ever seeing the board. I should have known the moment Bryce arrived for his cultural immersion. He swaggered into our Monday stand-up clutching a branded water bottle, wearing sneakers worth more than my weekly grocery bill. He didn't ask to join. He simply assumed the empty seat at my right hand, as if it were reserved for royalty. I caught the glance from Maria in accounting, a subtle flare of the eyes that confirmed this wasn't a courtesy visit. This was an infiltration. By Tuesday, my access codes to the quarterly forecasts stopped working. IT said it was a routine security update, but the new primary login belonged to Bryce. The same Bryce who, 3 weeks prior, had asked if EBITDA was a new kind of yoga. My scheduled deep dive with the Berlin team was mysteriously cancelled due to scheduling conflicts that never appeared on my calendar. The partner call I'd spearheaded for a year? I was told my presence wasn't synergistic with the new dynamic. When I went to the head of HR, her smile was a locked door. And when I finally cornered the CEO, David, all I got was a shrug and a line about evolving beyond old structures. The translation was crystal clear. My time here was over. But I'd been through 2 company near collapses and a hostile takeover bid. You don't survive that without learning to feel the pressure drop before the storm hits. This wasn't just office politics. This was a deliberate, quiet erasure. And I wasn't being outplayed. I was being made invisible. The signs were a checklist of corporate humiliation. My name was quietly removed from the high-priority project distribution lists. Invites to strategy offsites dried up. My weekly one-on-one with David was perpetually rescheduled, then forgotten. The administrative assistants who used to greet me by name now looked past me, their loyalty shifting with the wind. I was becoming a ghost in my own department, my authority dissolving like sugar in hot water. By Friday, Bryce was my permanent shadow. He didn't learn, he presided. He'd sit through meetings scrolling on his phone, then drop a buzzword like paradigm shift or digital native disruption without being able to define our core operating margin. In a review of the Q3 projections, he suggested we pivot to a more agile revenue stream, but couldn't name our top 3 products. The team's confusion was a palpable fog. People who had reported to me for a decade began sending tentative copied emails to Bryce for approval on matters he couldn't possibly understand. The structure I had built, brick by brick, was being handed to someone who saw it as a playground. The moment of pure, unvarnished truth came later that afternoon. I was walking past David's closed office, the one with the frosted glass that did little to muffle sound, and I heard his loud, familiar laugh. It was followed by Bryce's voice, clear and conspiratorial. "She manages tasks, not vision. It's an energy mismatch. We need someone who gets the vibe of where we're going." I froze. My hand, which had been moving toward the door handle, stopped. The metal felt suddenly icy. I didn't burst in. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I turned and walked slowly back to my desk, each step heavy with the weight of understanding. The foundation I'd poured 12 years of my life into was being dismantled, not for incompetence, but for a perceived lack of the right vibe. It was a rejection not of my work, but of my essence. Vanity rents the room, but competence owns the building, and they had decided to redecorate. The formal end arrived via email at 7:02 a.m. the following Monday. The subject line read, "Leadership Evolution Announcement." I was at my kitchen island, taking the first bitter sip of morning tea, when the notification lit up my phone. It was a company-wide blast from David, written in that oily, corporate speak that tries to dress a wound in glitter. It spoke of exciting new chapters, future-focused leadership, and the injection of next-generation thinking. It announced Bryce's promotion to head of strategic vision, effective immediately, and then nestled in the third paragraph like an afterthought. We thank Elena for her many years of dedicated service and wish her the very best in her next chapter. 12 years, 3 promotions, countless crises averted, all condensed into a single passive-aggressive sentence. My career there was over, dismissed as politely, and finally as clearing a used coffee cup from a conference table. Driving to the office for the last time felt surreal. I wasn't sure why I was going at all, perhaps for closure, or perhaps out of some stubborn need to witness my own professional wake. The atmosphere when I entered was thick with a silence that was louder than any noise. It was the sound of dozens of people pretending not to see a car crash. My office was already cleared. A maintenance guy I'd known for years was wheeling out my old ergonomic chair, his eyes downcast. The nameplate on the door, the one that had read Eleanor Vance, Director of Operations, was gone. In its place, already slightly crooked, was a new one, B. Ellison. I found David by the coffee bar, laughing with someone from marketing. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Elena," he said, his tone artificially light, "we're moving in a new direction. Bryce has the fresh perspective we need for this growth phase. You understand how these things go." I nodded once. What was there to say? Arguing with a decision already made and announced was beneath me. I packed a single cardboard box from a stack by the supply closet, a resilient snake plant from my windowsill, a framed photo of the original, scrappy team from when we worked out of a drafty rented warehouse, and a ceramic mug a colleague had made for me years ago. Bryce popped his head in as I was leaving, his phone held aloft as if to record the moment. "No bad blood, yeah?" he said, his attention already splintered by a stream of notifications. "We're gonna crush it. New energy, you know?" I just looked at him, really looked, at the unearned confidence in his eyes. "Some roads are harder to map than others," I said, my voice flat. He smiled and gave a thumbs up, utterly missing the point, the warning, the promise in my words. He didn't just lose an employee, he voided his own authority. From my home office, a quiet, book-lined room with a sturdy oak desk and a view of my modest garden, I watched the chaos unfold in real time. Bryce, now officially in charge, began what his first company-wide memo called a corporate renaissance. He axed our longest-standing supplier contract, a family-run firm we'd partnered with through 2 recessions, calling it Legacy Drag. He replaced a seasoned 20-person field team with an unproven, bug-ridden automation platform he'd read about in a tech blog. The Slack channels I'd been quietly added to by former team members were now rivers of panic and disbelief. "Does he know what a supply chain is?" one message read. Another, "He just asked me to synergize our verticals, and I have no idea what that means." I read them all. I felt the rising tide of anxiety, but I didn't respond, not yet. My silence was a strategic tool, and it needed to be absolute. Then a single text lit up my screen, cutting through the noise. It was from Arthur Lynn, the chairman of the board, a man of few words and immense quiet power, who valued balance sheets over bromides and results over rhetoric. It read, "Stand by, do not engage." That was all, 4 words. It was the confirmation I needed, the signal that the game I had prepared for was still very much in play. You see, while David was busy playing proud father and corporate visionary, I had spent the last 8 months in closed-door sessions with Arthur and the board's finance committee. We were in the final stages of negotiating a silent capital partnership with a prestigious Nordic investment firm, a $40 million lifeline of capital and credibility that was meant to secure our next decade. This was not David's deal. He had been intentionally sidelined, deemed too impulsive, too focused on flashover foundation. The deal, per the ironclad clauses in my executive contract, clauses David had never bothered to read, could not be unilaterally altered or finalized if the negotiating executive, me, was terminated without cause. David, in his arrogant haste to install his son, had not only fired me, he had fired the chief architect of the company's future, and in doing so, he had triggered a contractual landmine. He'd handed the board the master key to his own cage. I opened my personal encrypted drive, the one labelled Project Horizon. Inside, folders stacked like dominoes, financial models with intricate formulas, legal annotations in red and blue, private board minutes, email threads with Arthur that plotted a careful, strategic future. I went straight to the executive agreement. Clause 14B was the linchpin, highlighted in yellow from months ago. Termination of the negotiating executive nullifies CEO approval authority on pending agreements classified under Schedule D, pending full board re-ratification. In plain English, David had just stripped himself of the power to close the very deal the company desperately needed. The $40 million was now in limbo, and the nervous Nordic investors who had built their trust in me through months of diligent work would now only take a call from one person. I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to leak stories or file a lawsuit. I just had to wait. The inevitable gravitational pull of consequences would do all the work for me. The tremors started small, then grew into quakes. A week after my departure, Landstrom Industries, our largest client, sent a terse, formal notice to our legal and operations departments. They were pausing all ongoing contracts and purchase orders, citing recent leadership instability and concerns over strategic continuity. This single email froze millions in revenue. Vendor portals for critical components were suspended one by one. The board's silence, once a comfort to David, became a deafening, ominous void. David, finally sensing the cliff edge beneath his feet, called a rushed all-hands meeting. He stood in the atrium talking about resilience and the temporary discomfort of transformation. Meanwhile, Bryce was in the lobby, handing out expensive protein bars and talking to interns about disruptive cohesion. He was playing CEO, utterly oblivious to the structural cracks widening beneath his feet. Then Arthur Lynn walked into the headquarters. He hadn't visited the operational offices in over 3 years. His presence was an event, an anomaly. He moved through the sleek glass lobby not like a visitor, but like a surgeon entering an operating room, slow, deliberate, and chilling in his focus. David, spotting him, practically jogged over, his face breaking into a wide, performative grin. "Arthur, this is a wonderful surprise. Here to see the new era in action?" Arthur didn't return the smile. He didn't offer his hand. He simply stopped, looked David directly in the eye, and in a voice low enough to be intimate but sharp enough to cut glass, asked, "What have you done?" The question hung in the air, stripping all the pretense and polish from the room. David faltered. His smile twitched. "We're modernizing, Arthur. Unleashing potential. She was holding us back, stuck in old ways." Arthur's expression didn't change. His voice dropped even further, a whisper that carried to every ear straining to hear. "You've jeopardized the entire Horizon deal. You have destabilized this company. Gather the board, now." He then turned and walked back toward the elevators, leaving David standing alone in the suddenly cavernous lobby, his confidence evaporating into the sterile, air-conditioned air. The building held its breath. The emergency board session lasted 5 hours. I wasn't there. I was at my kitchen table, sunlight streaming in, reviewing the precise non-negotiable terms I would set. The call came just after 8 p.m. Arthur's voice, usually so measured, was stripped of all ceremony, raw with urgency. "Can you stabilize this?" he asked. "No hello, no preamble." "I can," I said, my own voice calm, "but not under the old hierarchy, not with any shadows." "We anticipate that," he replied instantly. "Interim CEO, full operational command, Bryce is gone, David is on administrative leave, pending a full governance review. The vacant board seat is yours, effective immediately." I listed my conditions, each one a brick in the new foundation. Direct unilateral control over all vendor and client reinstatements. Final sign-off on the restructured Horizon deal. A clean, swift separation for Bryce with no consultancy clause. Agreed, Arthur said without hesitation. And just like that, with a conversation that lasted less than 3 minutes, the exile ended. I returned the next morning, not to fanfare or apologies, but to a silent, widespread acknowledgement of a new reality. My old office was empty, Bryce's tasteless neon hustle sign already removed from the wall. I didn't go there. I went straight to the boardroom. They were all there. Arthur, the other directors, the outside counsel, and David, sitting not at the head but along the side, shrunk into his suit, staring at the polished table, avoiding every eye, especially mine. The vote to install me as interim chief executive was a unanimous, somber formality. When the secretary recorded the last vote, Arthur turned to David. Your fiduciary review is scheduled for Thursday. You are relieved of all daily operational duties effective now. No one in the room spoke up for him. No one offered a word of comfort. The silence was his verdict. I got to work before the meeting even adjourned. I called Landstrom from the boardroom and assured them of continuity. I unfroze the vendor agreements with a few keystrokes. I drafted the email to the Nordic Consortium, restarting the dialogue. I had legal send Bryce's termination and separation agreement before lunch. There were no triumphant speeches to the staff, no I told you so moments. I simply walked into the epicenter of the chaos and began the quiet, relentless, satisfying work of restoring order. I dismantled Bryce's so-called vision documents. I reinstated the fired field team. I called the family-run supplier and personally apologized. In the end, David's fatal mistake was believing that bloodline was a strategy. He confused nepotism with legacy, vibes with vision. He forgot that in business, as in everything that matters, true legacy isn't about who you know or who you place in a corner office. It's about what you know. It's about the deep, unglamorous work of understanding the machinery, foreseeing the cracks, and being the only one with the blueprint to repair them. He thought he was writing me out of the story. He never realized I was the one holding the pen. And I knew exactly how to write the ending. Not with a bang, but with the steady, undeniable sound of a company being saved from the man who almost broke it. If you found this story of quiet strategy and calculated patience satisfying, do me a solid and like this video. It helps the channel Wines of Thought more than you know. Subscribe for more tales where the underdog thinks 10 moves ahead and where real power is earned, not inherited.